we always say in the Black Panther Party that they can do anything they want to us. We might not be back. I might be in jail. I might be anywhere. But when I leave, you can remember I said with the last words on my lips that I am a revolutionary. And you're going to have to keep on saying that.
Hey everyone, my name is Andre Walton. I'm the Southeast Regional Organizer for OWR, and welcome to The Revolution. Today we're speaking to Chris Larson, who is running for Wisconsin's U.S. Senate seat to face Ron Johnson. However, before that becomes a reality, he must fight to get through the highly contested Democratic primary. Chris Larson is currently a state senator for Wisconsin's 7th Senate District. And thanks for joining us, Chris. How are you doing today?
I'm good. I'm very good. Very glad to join you. Good to see you again and be a part of the show.
Awesome. Yeah, I'm really glad to have you on. I was really excited to hear that you're running. We've previously endorsed you for county executive, and you've been in the Senate for a while. So really happy to see that you're running. So tell us a little bit about your background and you know, kind of your background as a senator as well.
Sure. So yeah, I grew up in a middle class family in Greenfield, Wisconsin, which is one of the suburbs of Milwaukee. And then went on to college where I worked my way through UW Milwaukee, shifting gears as folks do along the way. So I actually started as a film student, then shifted over to engineering for a hot minute, and then settled on business as being my degree of choice until I got the political bite, which is another way of saying started to realize the world around me was not going to change all on its own. And got more and more involved, starting with, you know, having buttons on my backpack in the 2004 campaign and hoping that that would make the change to beat George W. Bush, who I thought was the worst president we could ever get. And then once that didn't materialize, I pledged to myself that I get more and more involved. So while I was working full-time, while I was still going to school full-time, got involved and decided to run for office as a county supervisor against a candidate who didn't believe that climate change was real. And that was my pathway into politics, was through environmental activism of trying to make sure that we are preserving the planet for the next generation and for all of humanity. And so it was a local office, county board. I got outspent, but not outworked. This was the snowiest winter in about 50 years. We got out and knocked on tons and tons of doors and won that local office with 53% of the vote. And that was the same district on the same day where Scott Walker got 2/3 of the vote. So really a testament to making sure that you can actually get out and work. And then from there was, you know, kind of marched to my own drum of like, continuing to push and continuing to be an activist, never having the clipboard too far away from me. It's still have it right here. And so when the incumbent state senator who was a Democrat, was veering way off of what so many neighbors wanted to see, and what are usually traditional, and now taken for granted as traditional Democratic principles, like a woman's right to choose, like standing up against corporations and fossil fuel energy, as well as school public education being something that we all strive for, and not shifting that towards private for-profit outlets. He was on the wrong side of all of those issues, but he was a Democrat, and so even just talking about running against him caught the attention of the party elites. And so they made a few phone calls and said that I would be run out of the party if I got involved, and anybody that helped me would be in the same boat. And I don't know about you, Andre, and other folks, but you know, it took me like 2 seconds to realize, well, that's exactly why I have to get involved, because otherwise, good people are not. Good people are not going to continue to lean in, run for office, get in office, and that's how we end up with this. A lackluster priorities, and things just never change. So we worked really hard for 3 months through that summer, and knocked on a ton of doors. In that race, I think I lost 15 pounds out knocking on doors over 3 months, and I'm usually a marathoner already, so it was quite a bit that we got out there for. And we ended up winning by 20 points over an incumbent who'd been in office for 14 years in state office. So that was 2010, and that became very crucial because he was also somebody who wasn't the best friend of labor unions, which came into play when Scott Walker got elected that same day. Ron Johnson was also elected that same day. And just a few weeks after that, we had to take a stand and helped lead our Democratic senators out of the state to make space for people to step in, protest, and see what they were doing in an attack on public employees, which later became known as Act 10. And also ended up making space for people to show up at the Capitol, teachers, sanitation workers, public employees who were just fighting for their right to collectively bargain. And we ended up being gone for 3 weeks, and they ended up mounting the largest protest in Wisconsin history. So that was 10 years ago, and had all 14 of us not left, which means if I hadn't beaten that guy, that would have been just another blip that they would have just plowed right through. So that was I guess that's a good intro into my political background and what gets me up and out of bed most days.
That's great. So there's kind of this political shift that there's an outside game, and
Yep.
unless you're inside the club, you kind of get left out. So it's really good to see and hear that your story went like that. But well, tell us what made you want to run for the Senate.
Yeah, for U.S. Senate. Yeah, I mean, Ron Johnson is the worst U.S. Senator in the country, and he's given Joe McCarthy a run for his money as being the worst in Wisconsin history. I mean, he's been bad since the beginning for anybody who pays really close attention, and it was devastating to see him win and beat one of my political heroes, Russ Feingold. And so the same day when I was elected to the state Senate, to see that happen was absolutely devastating. And I knew it was going to be a tough fight from then on out. And I realized, having worked in the state Senate and fighting and bearing my soul, and not just being against Scott Walker, which I'd been. I'd written more amendments to his budget than anybody. But also being for things, right? And I've authored or co-authored just about every piece of progressive legislation over the last 10 years, from raising the minimum wage to $15 to legalization of marijuana and decriminalization, you name it. And so being clear about what we're for, but knowing, as I go and fight in the state capitol, the system is rigged. The maps are rigged. We have gerrymandering, and the campaign finance laws favor the super rich and dark money to get involved and buy races. And so to change that, to actually change the game, we actually have to have Washington step in to do that. We actually have to have lawmakers who recognize the harm that is baked into this rigged system and who want to work very hard to make sure that it's unrigged, so that the average person has access to their democracy, whether that just be voting, something that should not be as hard as folks are making it out to be, or if they want to get involved and run for office. It should not be something for a political class of people who have to make it their full-time job. This should be something where the average person can get involved and doesn't have to be a millionaire, a billionaire, or somebody who's going to be put up by rich special interests to be able to get into office. So that's something I fundamentally believe. And then seeing Ron Johnson specifically at the end of last year, when he voted against the direct aid for people who were suffering the most through the pandemic, not only voting against it, but blocking the direct aid payments. You remember this? Twice. $1,400 payments twice, saying, I'm not sure that these folks really need it. Everyone I know seems to be doing just fine. And then starting to complain about the price tag, right? This was exactly 4 years after he wrote in a special provision for himself, for his business, so that he could make more money. And it cost just about the same amount of money. So to see that type of contradiction, that type of hypocrisy, where he voted for it for himself, for his family, when it vaulted him to being the 6th richest U.S. senator in the country, at the same time as the rest of us were struggling, and everyone was told that promise that we're all going to get through this together, like we were told after 9/11, like we were told after the Great Recession, only to find out that once the rich were taken care of, there was nothing left over for the rest of us. No. We have to abide by that promise to say we're going to learn the lessons from this pandemic and make sure that people are coming out of it better, especially those who went into it not doing so well, right? Students with mounting debt, people who are uninsured or in most cases underinsured, or in a lot of cases, afraid to actually utilize their health care because there are hidden costs and they could go bankrupt if they try to. Of making sure that people have access to paid family leave, right? They have access to paid sick days so that when they're doing the right thing and staying home and quarantining because they might have been exposed to the virus, that they're not going to go broke as a result of that. These lessons, so unrig the system so that democracy works for those folks. There is no clearer contrast in the race between me and my story and who I have fought for and Ron Johnson and what he stands for and what he's been doing for the last 11 years. So that's why I'm running, to make sure that we beat this guy and then get to work rolling up our sleeves, working with the grassroots to unrig this system so it works for everybody.
That's a really good answer. And I mean, you really hit on the point of like how out of touch he is. I mean, like $1,400 isn't really that much to the average person. I mean, you probably pay a bill or two and maybe get some groceries and that stuff is gone. So, I mean, like it was really beneficial, especially to the people who needed it. I know, like I myself, I was kind of struggling a little bit through it because when the pandemic first hit, my my other job at the time completely shut down and I was off work for like a month. So I was like, well, at the time I was just living paycheck to paycheck. So like, and then you said, all the people he knew. I'm pretty sure he doesn't know really any average working class people. So that's kind of funny. He said that he's probably talking about his millionaire friends don't need that $1,400. So that's pretty funny. But yeah, let's get into some policy questions. Oh yeah, go ahead.
But yeah, I mean that's exactly it. It's like, who is this guy fighting for? And he's literally said these things on the record, into a microphone, into Senate hearings, of saying, well, from all the friends I've got, they've got too much money after this pandemic. And it's like, who are you talking to? Like, who do you think you are representing? Right?
Yeah.
Because I've got friends and the people that I hang out with, and too many of our neighbors, they're one accident or one wayward bill away from going off the rails, right? People who, if their refrigerator breaks down, they can't just go to the store and get a new one, right? So that $1,400, that is something. It's not going to be able to lift folks out of poverty by any means, but it's also going to prevent so many people from going off the rails who were living on the edge for the last year. And that to me, it just demonstrated that clear contrast, right? So your story is not. It's not absurd, right? It's not out of the ordinary. So many people found themselves temporarily out of work over this last year. And if when so many people don't have enough money to bank on an emergency, when this national emergency came through, it is on us as the community, whether that community be the local government, the state government, or the federal government. It's on the community to step in and make sure people come out of this okay. That's it. That's what those checks were for, right? To make sure that you are okay, others are okay. No one is getting rich off of those things. Nobody is saying, oh yes, this is cool, I'm going to retire and coast off of this. And that is what is so frustrating, because catastrophe after catastrophe, folks have come out worse, and that has been going on now for 40 years, for my entire life. And it's about time we shift that system.
Yeah, I definitely agree with you there. But yeah, let's go ahead and get into some policy questions, my favorite part of the interviews. So as you know, we're one of the only industrialized countries that doesn't guarantee healthcare to its citizens. And as a result, there's been estimates about 45,000 people die each year because they either can't afford healthcare or they have inadequate healthcare. Now, I already know you support Medicare for all. This is no secret. But can you tell us why you think it's important for the U.S. to transition to a Medicare for all system compared to our current system that we have now?
Oh my gosh. I mean, what wouldn't it affect, right? Like, what decisions would people be able to make in life if they knew that their healthcare was covered, from being able to get out of a lousy job that they're stuck in because they have lackluster health insurance, to people who are in bad relationships where they might not be the breadwinner, they might be the person who's staying at home with the kiddos, but they're relying on their spouse for that health insurance because they wouldn't get it otherwise. Because right now in our country, we've got a system, we all assume this is how it always is and how it always will be, that your insurance is dictated, your value of what you're worth in terms of your health insurance coverage is dictated by the job that you've got, which is ridiculous. It's very classist, right? It's almost emblematic of the caste system in India, right? Which says, like, okay, if you're a barista, then sorry, you don't get access to healthcare unless you're working 24 or 5 hours a week at Starbucks, and are able to commit to that over a long period of time. or that says that if you have a pre-existing condition that you're not covered, right? It is ridiculous. And I feel like if you just walk through what life would be like if you actually had health care for any person, it is a game changer to be able to think like, oh my gosh, my kiddo fell off their bike and had some type of an accident where we want to get them checked out. And so many people, there's places in the state where you've got a $6,000 deductible that you have to get through before you can get access to your health care coverage on an annual basis. $6,000 you got to spend out of pocket before you actually get access to that health care. So in that situation, you don't even take the kid in because you're like, well, that's just going to cost that much money out of pocket. I'm not going to afford it. It's just a gamble. It's like, am I going to hit the $6,000 this year? If not, then we're just going to try and hold it, see if you can hold it together past New Year's. And if things are bad, then we'll check in then. It is absolutely ridiculous, right? That we have, so on that front, being able to make sure that your family is okay and has access to healthcare. If you already are living with a disease, which frankly, 1 in 6 of our neighbors across the country already has, right? Something that they call pre-existing conditions. It's just called life. Right? Whether that be somebody who had a previous cancer diagnosis or has asthma like I do and have had since I was 5, or for our neighbors who have diabetes, that you can have access to your medicine and what it will be covered and you will get it without having to figure out some type of arcane system to get it. Some people were relying on the Canadian system because of cheaper prescriptions. Well, that broke down this last year when the border closed. So I've talked to people who, 10% of people who are diabetic, they need insulin to stay alive. And I've talked to people who are rationing it to the limit just to stay alive and make it last because our country charges so much more, hundreds of dollars more for insulin than they do right across the border in Canada. That is ridiculous. And it's not only ridiculous, we can absolutely change it if we break away from the model that says pharmaceutical companies got to get theirs, health insurance companies got to get theirs, and big hospitals that claim nonprofit status are not as focused on making sure that their top executives get a salary and are more focused on taking care of patients. All that is possible, and you mentioned it, you referenced it in your question. This is possible because it's been done in every other industrialized country in the world. So we can absolutely do it. We can get to that. And I think most people have already figured that out. Most people understand that they are worth actually having health care whenever they need it. And we'd be a lot healthier if that were the case. So yeah, through to the bones, man. I remember very viscerally being in that situation where I was uninsured and trying to be able to get access to health care, health insurance, and just being completely helpless. Of like, it was like the worst game show I'd ever been a part of, where they were like, oh, do you have any pre-existing conditions? Do you have any medicines that you take? And I was like, well, yeah, I have asthma, but I've run marathons. I literally am probably one of the healthiest people you've ever talked to. And they were like, oh, we got you. We'll cover everything except that. I was like, well, if I don't have that covered, then I'm going to get sick. I will find it harder to breathe, and I will be in the hospital on an annual basis to get the care that I need. And they're like, well, sorry, we'll cover everything else, right? It's like, how is this a healthcare system? How is this possible? And thinking of how many people have gone through that, yeah, that is with me because that is part of my life, and I carry the burden on my shoulders of all the people that I've talked to who have gone through similar situations, and will fight like heck to make sure that we change it and get Medicare for all.
Yeah, we have a pretty absurd system. I don't have to tell you that. But so now it's one thing to support Medicare for all, which I know you do, but it's another to fight for it. So one of the biggest issues I have with some of the congressional leaders and some of the Senate leaders is that they support progressive issues, maybe a $15 minimum wage, maybe climate action, maybe whatever progressive thing you want to stick to the wall. But sometimes they don't actually fight for it, and that might be for various reasons. Maybe it's like a lot of lobbyists fighting. Maybe they're fighting the leadership. But I think it's imperative.
Stock portfolio.
Yeah. Maybe they got some money invested in those companies with obviously we know with the stock market and whatnot. But I think it's a real issue because, it's one thing to run and campaign on it, but it's another to actually fight for it. How can you assure voters that you'll continue to fight for Medicare for all if elected?
Yeah. I mean, this is who I am. I would say, look, there are, and I get, you haven't really mentioned them, but there's other candidates in the race, right, on the Democratic side. I would say the easiest thing is to be able to look at the records. I've got the receipts. I've been fighting for this stuff for as long as I've been in office and before that. So you can literally check anywhere along the way, and we make it pretty easy. I've written over 200 newsletters on various topics because I think it's important to make sure you're communicating exactly where you stand on issues. I come from that school of politics that says you should represent the people and not be afraid to say where you stand on things. And then even beyond that of doing town halls and listening sessions. So it's that two-way street, so you can actually hear directly from people and asking and doing surveys. So I know that's where they stand too. And I can do a better job of representing their voice. But yeah, I've been pretty consistent on this over the years. And yeah, I think this is one that we absolutely need to fight for and actually need to push. And it's not going to be easy by any means. I just think of how many times we just do the incremental change along the way, and you see it in small ways and big at the national level. And I get, sometimes it's just tempting to just get somebody who's not going to harm anymore, of getting the Republican out. But the real question should be, how good can we get? What can we get? And having somebody who's going to be a fighter. So I'll give you, we're on Skype. All I can do a virtual pinky promise.
I'll take
This is
that.
who I am. This is absolutely who I am to my core.
All right, I'll take that. I'll be like, hey, you pinky promised me. But
Virtual pinky.
yeah,
Yeah.
most definitely. But kind of going along with that theme, so it's not only just the fighting issue, but there's also an issue in the Senate where we have, I'm gonna just say, like, right-wing Democrats who tend to side with Republicans, and that's another reason why we don't really see progressive legislation passed when it comes to like the $15 minimum wage, and we're also seeing the fight happen right now with the infrastructure bill. And that's an issue that I think has to do with campaign finance more, but we'll talk about that a little bit more later.
Yes.
But what do you think is one of the best ways to deal with senators who continue to block left-wing policy and side with the Republican Party on left-wing issues?
Yeah, I mean, you kind of snuck up on it there. You had the question. You have the answer in your question, Andre, which is having campaign finance reform so that it is because it's like a waste. Like right now, campaign finance and how much you raise is just the way station to be able to even let candidates on the highway to be able to run for office. And it's kind of a ridiculous thing if you think about it. Would be nice if there was actually like a detailed questionnaire about like where you stand on different issues and like, frankly, your dedication to the country as a whole, your ability that you're not going to try and overthrow the democracy if you lose an election. That should be pretty important. But right now, the biggest thing to be able to get candidates that people check on is their campaign finance and how much they're spending, how much they're raising, and less where that money is coming from. So that's led to this class of people who are then in office that are either super rich themselves, 66 of the 100 US senators are millionaires, or they are connected to very rich special interests because they have to fundraise on average something like $10,000 a day for a US senator to be able to stay in office. And that is something where, like, the average person cannot do that. So having campaign finance reform, so you are blocking dark money from getting involved, that you are having publicly funded elections, is something that's paramount to make sure that you level the playing field of who can get into office. That combined with making it universally accessible for people to vote. This is in our Constitution. The right to vote is there, 3 different places. And for whatever reason, it gets plowed over and gets disregarded by the U.S. Supreme Court when they rule on this with all of these burdens that are thrown out there time and time again. And so, again, if we have to continue to enshrine it in the Constitution with something even stronger, let's do it. But making sure that across the country there's access to the polls through early voting, through blocking those other forms of suppression that Republicans have gotten, then taken from just being a hobby to doing professionally to try and stop people from voting. That opens the door for who is in those offices, Andre. Then you have the people. Then you have the players on the team, right, who are actually representing the people and not those who are representing the people who funded their campaigns or them trying to represent their stock portfolio and be able to try and figure out a way to improve it. That is it, right? Like, I firmly believe that having campaign finance reform is the bill that unlocks every other bill, every other priority that's not just progressive, but popular, things that people want to see, like universal access to healthcare, addressing climate change in a meaningful way so we can stave off the extinction of our species and more problems on our planet, that you can actually have a living wage for workers, where they don't have to work themselves to the bone and still not be able to afford a place to live, a one-bedroom apartment, which right now nobody can live on the minimum wage and afford an apartment and groceries in the entire country, right? Those things change once you have the right people in office. You get the right people in office by making it easier for people, for regular people, not the millionaires and the billionaires, to be able to be the candidates and be the elected officials at every level of office.
Yeah, yeah, and I think you're right. I mean, campaign finance is kind of the underlying evil that kind of stops all the progressive issues or anything that would be good for working people from getting passed in Washington. That's why we kind of have a system. And I think I read a was it Princeton or Harvard? It was like a Princeton or Harvard study that showed that like if something by the elite wants to get passed, the big donors, it gets passed. I think it was like 30 something percent of the time in Washington, and progressive policies that working people want to get passed almost never get passed, and that's literally directly tied to campaign finance. So, yeah, if we want to get anything passed, in my opinion, I think campaign finance reform needs to be one of those top issues, and I think it just hasn't hit the top yet because it's not like one of those hot topic things that you can just talk about at a campaign stop and people just automatically understand. But I think it has to be at the top. So yeah, I mean, just kind of talking about that. I think it's also a big reason why we don't have like um, a huge amount of work being done when it comes to climate change.
Mm-hmm.
So experts have estimated that we have less than 12 years to seriously address climate change, but before we have like irreversible damage. And right now we're seeing little to no change. And like we said, I think it
Mm-hmm.
really has to do with that campaign finance situation. But what do you think is the best way to bring climate change back to the forefront and make it a top issue for the Senate?
Yeah, I mean, it is. It is. And there are easy ways to be able to talk about it across the state of Wisconsin. We're seeing it in the increase in floods on some years, and we're seeing it in the cases of increased droughts and wildfires, where we are setting records in terms of how often that is happening on a repeated basis. We're also seeing that in terms of what's happening with our water usage, where big corporate farms are being able to drain our aquifers and drain access to water and polluting what they throw back. But we're seeing the direct impacts of that. And if you need to look for bigger examples, look at the national news. Look at how the West is on fire, where they are setting records in terms of their heat. At the same time as we're setting records as having the earliest ever hurricanes this very year, hitting the U.S. coast well before the normal season. We're seeing all of these things, and anybody who's paying attention is recognizing the impacts this is going to have for the long-term future of Wisconsin, of our country, and of our planet. And I think there might have been a time where we thought, for the future generations, and they thought like the future where everyone's wearing, matching uniforms and everyone has flying cars, but like, guess what? Future's here. We are literally past the time that Back of the Future could even think of. We're already 6 years past theirs of where the furthest they could think out. And we are at the point right now where this is a huge issue, and it is affecting people, right? It's affecting people directly in terms of increased instances of asthma among kids. 1 in 10 kids is growing up with asthma now because we have not shifted away from fossil fuels fast enough. You are seeing it in terms of longevity. We've seen the life expectancy of the entire globe start to go down for the first time in human history. And so this is something that should be front of mind for so many different folks. And I am comforted by knowing that the younger generation recognizes this as the issue that it is. And so for me, like I said earlier, this was my pathway into politics, was getting involved in environmental advocacy, right? And in that case, it was fighting against Bush and his efforts to repeal the Clean Air and Water Acts. And so that was something that triggered me to get more involved. This generation gets it. This generation understands that we need to be doing more, and this should be part of every decision that we make at the national level, because it has huge repercussions. And I am comforted by, there's enough politicians where they're starting to talk about this stuff nationally. We haven't made the big changes we need to, right? Like shifting the entire postal system's fleet to electric rechargeable vehicles, which would completely very much reduce the impact, the footprint of the federal government. Same thing with the other federal fleets, being able to make that change while putting in charging systems across the country would make this something that's a more widespread technology. And doing that with every department across the country completely shifts how we do this stuff. So I do think that the public is there. The younger generation certainly is there. And, I think it's a person-to-person conversations for folks who want to get involved, who want to pick up a clipboard and want to talk to their neighbors. Because sometimes some of this stuff might not come up until somebody knocks on their door and asks the question, and then they think about it and they realize, oh yeah, this is something that we should do. And I'd say, I know I've talked a little bit on it, but one of the big things about Wisconsin that would benefit in a great way is we spend $10 billion annually on energy needs for our state. $10 billion. You know where that money's going? We do not have coal here. We do not have oil here. We do not have natural gas here. So when we are spending this money, it is leaving the state. So shifting over towards renewable sources of energy, like solar and wind, that money stays in the state. It recirculates here, and it increases wealth for our entire state. So in a very, very Wisconsin-focused way, this helps save the planet, but also helps save a heck of a lot of money for Wisconsin.
Wow, I didn't know that. So thanks for informing me about that. But yeah, my next question, I suppose, is more of a personal question for me because I'm directly impacted by it. So there have been calls to cancel all the student debt. Right now, there's about, I think it was 1.9 trillion in student debt. I myself have $39,000 in student debt.
Thanks.
And yeah, and I have friends who have way more than I do, and some a little bit less, but for the most part, it's all around that same range. Do you support the cancellation of student debt, of loan debt?
I do. Yeah, I do. And we, I co-authored a bill at the state level that would have helped shift down the burden on students. I've been sponsoring that for 10 years, and that's something that it would help at the state level. It would help eliminate. You'd be able to write off in your taxes whatever you paid off in terms of your student loan. But I do think bigger things need to be done with the ending of student debt. So I would say one step further. While I support that, I also support one step further, which is universal access to public education, which I think is where we need to be going. That's the standard I would like to hit nationally. We have it in all states for K-12, but you are not going to be able to get the jobs that are paying the salary to be able to afford a house, afford a car payment, if you are just having a high school diploma. And so being able to have access to technical education or a higher level education is so key. And frankly, as the world is changing, as technology is shifting, it's so important to make sure that you have the ability to continue your education. And I always have to correct myself. I didn't say it this time because sometimes people say, oh, go back to college, go back to school. Like, no. Going forward, it's so important that we all continue to be educated and improve on our knowledge of the world and get new skills to be able to get different jobs that matter for the future. And so that's my standard. We should have universal education covered, and that's something that we absolutely could do if we ended up making sure we're collecting a fair share from the super rich and making sure that we're reforming the university system so that it is something that is it's more incentivized for serving the public than it is currently.
Yeah, and I think one of the issues is that with student loan debt, it actually stagnates the economy because
Yeah.
if you already have a huge debt on you might not go back to for that graduate degree. You might not, buy a car. You might put off, buying a house. All these things that actually helps build up the economy. You're actually stagnating it. So I know definitely for myself, I'm like, Yeah, I don't know when I'm ever going to buy a house because I want to get rid of this debt first, and it's going to take some time. So, yeah, I think we definitely got to revisit that as much as possible. But those were all the
Yep.
set questions I had for you. Was there anything that we didn't or I didn't ask you that you would like to kind of talk about that you want to highlight about your campaign or some policy issues?
Sure, sure. Yeah. And on that, your situation, Andre, is not unique. Like that is common right now to the point where I don't know how old you are, but I know you're younger than me. And I know that that your generation is in that situation where it's, people are individually making that decisions to delay buying a house, buying a car, getting married, starting a family, and that is having a huge impact on our country. It's making us less competitive overall. So on an individual basis, it sucks because
It does.
I've been there. It took me 10 years to pay off my college loans. I tried like mad to pay and work my way through college, but the cost just went exponentially after Bush changed the law so that you cannot extinguish student loan debt in a bankruptcy. And so then lenders thought, hey, this is great, free money, free return no matter what, and just started giving it out like gangbusters. So we've gotten to the situation where we absolutely have to do something because it is affecting generations of people, and it's completely stalling the ability of people to succeed in life. If that's something you're thinking of, on one side you've got your college debt, and another side you've got your what's going to matter for healthcare if you have access to it. Like it is holding back a generation of Americans, and I think those two things in and of themselves should motivate younger people to get involved in politics because both of those things can change. That's the system as it's set up right now, but it's not a set system. We can change that. So that I'd say take that and launch into the whole theme of my campaign, which is unrigging the system, so that right now it's, yes, the system feels broken, but it is not by accident. This is by design. This is by design by Wall Street, by corporations, and by the super rich who run things in Washington. And if you want to change those things, you have to vote. You have to get involved, and you have to back the candidates who are going to back you up. That's why I'm running. That's why I've run in the past. That's why I've worked and spent my life trying to train up other candidates and train other people to get more involved and learn about the grassroots, and helped elect 36 people to office. This campaign is about unrigging the system nationally so that people have the ability to thrive. They have the access to the American dream that has gotten further and further out of grasp or out of reach as the years go on. It does not have to be that way, and electing the right people to office is exactly how we change that. So Ron Johnson is one of the worst in the country for that. He, as I mentioned, he voted to increase his own wealth, and that is something at the same time as he ended up voting to try and block access to aid for people in need. So this is a chance to turn this seat 180 degrees around and get somebody out who is blocking progress and get somebody in who is going to fight for you every single day until you have an easier life and have access to the American dream that you deserve. So I always forget to mention my website. If you haven't gone there while we're sitting here listening to this, I encourage you to check out voteforlarson.org. You can see the launch video. You can see the different issues that I believe in, and more importantly, to be able to share your own story if you have one, or ask any questions you might have on any issue that's not covered there already. So do my best to try and be transparent and get back to people as much as we can. So that's me, that's us, and I really appreciate the time being able to talk to you, Andre.
Yeah, no problem. Thanks for taking the time out. I think people are really going to enjoy this interview. And yeah, if you guys are interested in Chris Larson's campaign, go check out his website, go and donate, do whatever you can to help Progressive out. But yeah, I really appreciate it, and good luck with the rest of your campaign, Chris.
Thank you, Andre. You too.
Thank you.
So we always say in the Black Panther Party that they can do anything they want to us. We might not be back. I might be in jail. I might be anywhere. But when I leave, you can remember I said with the last words on my lips that I am a revolutionary.